Yeah. Evening, y'all. How's it? Welcome to another Lockdown Live chat. As usual, joined with my awesome co-host, Mr. Draconem Medium himself, Alec Lawson. How's it going?
Oh, it's good, bro. You know, we've been doing this for quite a while now, so there's not much more to say on my front in terms of like the lockdown and whatnot. So, yeah, It's all good.
So now that we've actually been doing this for close to 7 odd months, we thought we'd shake it up and try to give a little bit of an informative route for any of the bands that have been checking this out. So what better way to actually do that than bringing over our compadre all the way from Canada? We got Mr. Curtis Dewar. How's it going?
Hello. Going good.
It's good to finally put a face to the voice of the Dumb and Dumbest podcast.
Yeah.
Well,
I try
anyway.
I try to be incognito.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we brought you out here for all the SA peeps watching. So, yeah, first off, public relations. I mean, to anybody that doesn't know what PR is all about, the definition, according to Google, and I'll make sure I get this right, is the professional maintenance of a favorable public image by a company or organization for a famous public figure or artist. Now, that's all fair and well, but Curtis, maybe you can actually embellish in terms of extreme metal. What is PR actually involving?
Well, basically, the very basic thing is getting reviews, interviews, news, media coverage. That's the total nutshell version of PR for music. You're getting reviews, interviews, news items. You're trying to get the person or band rather known about through different media like blogs, podcasts, magazines, whatever you can, basically. That's the nutshell version.
Right. And to kind of embellish on that, because obviously a lot of people think PR agency equals money, but in terms of actual clientele, agencies still have the right to actually bring on any band that they feel fit or choose not to bring on a band. So what are some of the key fundamental aspects that you would look into as far as a band goes, bringing them on as a client?
Okay, well, the number one thing is I have to think either the music is good, like I like it, and if I don't personally like it, then I have to make sure that it's something that I can sell to reviewers and interviewers and that type of thing. If I don't think the band can be sold, there's no point in me taking it. Because if I do that, and a lot of PR places will do something like that, but what ends up happening is that the band wastes their money or the label wastes their money, people get mad, and it's a waste of time for everyone involved. So you need to make sure that you feel that the band is a correct fit for your PR, and on top of that, that you can sell them to your contacts. Because if I had, for example, someone who sounded like Justin Bieber come to me, I can't sell them to my metal contacts. You know what I mean? So that's basically the nutshell version of what you just said, or what you asked rather.
Sick. So I had a discussion with like a local PR person recently, and just around one of his clients was doing better than another client, and for him it was because the client that was doing well was releasing more often. So this conversation had like basically resulted in the conclusion that it's better for a band to release 3 EPs in 1 year than 1 album. Do you agree with a statement like that? Or
it depends, because here's one, just to go back to the beginning of the question. The reason that the other band might not have been doing well is it could also be that the journalist just didn't like the band. That can happen. Like, I mean, you can be like the best band, the PR can love the band, but if it doesn't connect with the journalist, it doesn't fucking matter. So you could keep releasing content till the cows come home, and if it's not relating to journalists, it ain't gonna fucking happen. Like a good example is like, okay, so there's a lot of those commercial metal bands that won't get reviewed by press, right? Like there's like, like the Five Finger Death Punches and stuff like that. Most of the blogs, they don't cover that band unless it's like a super mainstream publication, right? But they sell a lot of albums, right? But a lot of places will not review them. You know what I mean? So like they connect with the public, but they didn't connect with the journalist. So it's kind of a funny thing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I should have defined what I meant by like doing well.
Sure.
And
Sure.
what I meant was more along the lines of like Spotify streams and like
Right.
that sort of a metric, you know?
Well, that depends upon the PR, because most PRs do not cover the Spotify type things. There are certain types that do. Like, for example, I don't cover Spotify streams myself because I don't have the relationships with that. What I do is I mainly go after press in terms of blogs, podcasts, magazines, that type of thing. So I'm looking for that type of press. But for streams and stuff, it's the same thing, because, like, I mean, if the playlist curators aren't into the song, they're just not into the song. It doesn't matter, right? Like, I mean, other people might love it, but the curators might just hate it.
Cool. No,
Yeah,
100%.
it's hard to really say, because I mean, everything's a matter of taste, right? Like, something you like, I might not like, and reversely, I might love something and you're going to think it's complete shit, right? So my job is to try to make the person on the other end take a listen to my client, and then after that, it's their judgment call whether they're going to actually cover them or not. Because sometimes even if they cover them, it's not always a favorable review. So I can get like a client, a bunch of reviews, and I might think they're great, but the media just thinks they suck, and then they get bad press, and then they're mad at me still, even though they got quite a few reviews. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that kind of ties in with what I was actually going to ask next, because you see a lot of agencies out there, and a lot of them are boasting high reach mega publications like Revolver, or, you know, even Rolling Stone I've seen boasted it. But in actuality, what is the actual reality and the guarantee that if you took on one of those agencies that your that your band would even get featured in a publication like that?
Well, if you're a new band, you're pretty much not going to get featured in Rolling Stone. You're not going to get featured at Pitchfork. You're not going to get featured at Stereo Gum. But there is always a little tiny chance you could. No, like, there's no guarantee, right? There's absolutely no guarantee. Like, you could have I know of a person that hired the publicist for Lamb of God recently, or not recently, it was in the last year, because I don't want to name and shame this person. But within the last year, they had hired the same publicist as Lamb of God. And they weren't able to get anything close to what they wanted, even though they had Lamb of God's publicist, because of the fact they released at a busy time of the year. And also, the fact was that this person was more skilled with getting high-profile bands placements, not new bands. So even though they had Lamb of God's publicist, you know, they weren't getting Rolling Stone, they weren't getting Stereo Gum, blah, blah, blah. They got good coverage, but it wasn't at that level. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't like, yeah, so it was like they got reviews, they got the interviews, and they got a good volume, but they couldn't get what Lamb of God got just because they were connected to the publicist. You know what I mean?
Sick. I think you pointed out something that I'm going to just like ad lib a question. You mentioned a good time of year, you know, or like releasing at a bad time of year. If you were to sort of unpack and explain that statement for bands, what is a bad time of year to release?
A bad time of year to release is when there's a glut of other albums out at the same time. So, for example, the most busiest times of year are generally September to November for metal. So, and every single big band under the sun, moon, and stars release too. So if you're in a band, we're going to say from South Africa, since that's where we're talking. So if you're in a band from South Africa on an independent label that isn't tied to Sony, they aren't tied to Century Media, they aren't tied to Nuclear Blast, no one's going to be paying attention to you when, you know, for example, Cannibal Corpse is releasing, and, you know, Between the Buried and Me is releasing, and all these bands and all these bigger labels are releasing. Because the websites and the magazines, they want clicks. And if you're not going to get them the clicks that they want, they're not going to cover you. It's just as simple as that. So you need to get a lean period of time when there's less releases happening, and even then you're still taking a big chance.
Right.
Sick.
Well, actually, I was actually going to like try add on with that in terms of a relatively decent PR campaign. From the point that you get the final master and artwork, what is the general length that a band should look at prior to the release?
For the whole PR campaign, you mean?
Yes.
Usually 3 months if you can. And the reason why is because that gives it enough time that you can actually get it to print magazines. Because if you even want a shot at any print magazine, you need to have it there early, because they usually publish, you know, like they have publication deadlines basically, right? So 3 months ahead of time, and then you might have a shot with getting Decibel or Power Play or whatever the heck it is that you're trying to get. If you do it too late, you have zero chance, nothing whatsoever.
I guess that kind of works with what I wanted to actually follow up with. So like a hypothetical, like a little bit of a hypothetical here. You're a band, you put out an album 4 or 5 months ago, like just organically you managed to get a little bit of like decent local press and whatnot. Now you feel maybe a bit of a PR campaign can embellish the boot or boost some awareness or some sales. Is that something that blogs generally look at? Is an album that's released after the fact?
Never. But what you can do is you can always try to spin it as new. You can do a re-release or something like that, or you could do an international release in the case of someone from South Africa. We did that with Gary from Nuclear Winter. He had initially put out, I think it was Stormscapes. I think it was Stormscapes. No, was it Stormscapes? One of his EPs came out, and one of his friends introduced me to him. So what we did is we decided to release it internationally, quote unquote. And as a result, we got him some reviews, interviews, and that type of thing. But if I would have just sent it out, nothing would have happened.
That's good to know. I like cool. I read your social media optimization guide. I actually went this afternoon and went through the whole process to get that guide. And you mentioned several times that a band's the profile pic on your pages should be a picture of like the band members.
Yep.
And not the logo or anything else. And I just have like sort of two questions on that. The one is, and I mean, you deal with Gary, so you know there's quite a lot of solo metal artists out there. So what would you recommend if you're a solo artist? And then part two to that is like, for me personally, like I would be more attracted to a band's like album art than to a picture of these dudes. But I know you mentioned that seeing the people makes it feel more relatable and human. Yeah.
Well, it depends, because I mean, like you're not going to be the same necessarily as most people, right? Like I'm the same way. But if you actually look, like I've had bands do this where they've had the logo or they've had the art, and then they switch it over to a personal picture, and their interaction just goes, whoo. So even though you, and I'm the same way, I got to admit, would prefer to talk to just, you know, you don't really care about the picture, more people than you think do. So it's a matter of testing it. Like if you try it out and like, for example, you know, you want to test it out on your own social mediums, just test it, right? And if it doesn't work that way for you, don't do it. But as a general rule, what I've found is that if you put a face to the name, especially on Twitter and on Facebook, you get way higher interaction with people.
Cool. And then in terms of like a solo artist, would you still recommend that for them as well?
100%. All the time I would recommend it. I don't think Gary does it, but he should do it. But one thing he does do is on his I do want to point out on his Twitter, he uses his own name, Gary Stoutmeister.
It's true. It's true. I actually didn't know Nuclear Winter was on Twitter until I saw Gary retweeting, and I was like, oh, there we go. But again, sometimes a personal character, when you are a one-man band, you are the be-all and end-all there. I mean, essentially, you are a Trent Reznor, you know, putting together everything almost on your own. So makes sense.
But one thing I want to point out too, Lyle, before you go on, one thing I also want to point out is like when on your Twitter, I think it says Lyle MMD, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I think you get more interaction as a result of that than you would if you just said MMD. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, our MMD is a shamble, which is actually kind of the next question I actually wanted to bring up, kind of like off the cuff. Twitter. Twitter is something that's not commonly used by a lot of the South African metal bands, especially. But you've spoken constantly about the use of Twitter in connecting with other blogs and even more personally with other band direct members. You want to embellish on that as to the need for Twitter?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's just like, it's an easy way to interact with people. You can see in real time things happening. You can answer questions. You can search in Twitter for mentions of your genre, for example. And then you can go talk to people that are talking about your genre, which can get you more fans, more downloads, more sales. I'll do it with the label since I'm talking to you guys right now, and you're sitting right in front of me, Lyle. So if I was a label, I would be Twitter searching for anybody asking for metal recommendations, or things like what's some good black and death metal to listen to, that type of thing. And I would start interacting with people that were asking those questions, because what's going to happen is they're going to then see a label guy is talking to them, or a band member is talking to them. They will eventually click on your profile and they will listen to the music, and you might get a sale out of it.
Noted. Thank you.
That's
free
excellent.
advice there.
Yeah.
It's an easy way to make sales. Like I have a client named Caridi, and she released an album with oral music about 4 months ago, I think it was. And she hated the idea of getting on Twitter. She thought it sounded stupid, but I convinced her to do it. And on her first day on Twitter, she managed to get 4 sales.
Wow, that's
just
cool.
by going and talking to people.
That's excellent.
There you go.
I think on the topic of social media, I must admit I'm better at forming bands and solo projects than I am at social media. I'm actually pretty horrendous at it, and I literally only use Facebook at the moment. But now that you mentioned Twitter, I'll probably get on that train. And I know that Instagram is also something that bands use.
Yeah,
I do find balancing the sort of social media and generating content daunting with just one platform, because I don't know what the count is of the number of projects that I'm actually involved in, but it's too high.
Yeah.
Are there any tools that you could sort of recommend that would ease this sort of burden, like being able to post once and it appears across multiple platforms, and sharing pages to different pages and whatnot? I know it seems like less personal, but anything that you could recommend for any bands out there that are in a similar sort of state to me?
Let me just ask you, how many bands do you actually have that you need to have social mediums for right now?
That's a high number. Probably in the order of 10 plus.
Okay, so I wouldn't worry about that. Here's what I would do: is I would make one profile just for you, the person.
Okay.
And then what I would do is I would get a link tree set up with all of your bands, band camps or YouTubes or whatever the heck it is that you want to use to sell. And I would put that as the link in my profile for each and every single one. And I would use that in all my social media if I was you. And then you would be, and then you would just share any press or anything you wanted to share about each band on the one profile. And there's other bands that do that. Like, for example, there's a person named Jessie May, who I work with, and she has a book. She has a blog. She has 3 bands, I think. And she uses one profile, and it works really, really well for her.
Okay, cool. That was actually going to be my follow-up question, whether it's appropriate for a person to do it on their personal profile and post.
Well, as long as you're being the brand, if you're not, how do I explain this? If you're not using your social media just to interact with family and friends, and you don't really want to share your shit, then don't do it. But
yes.
if you're trying to actually share your bands and and your family doesn't mind that, you're posting stuff about black and death metal and horns and Satan and shit like that, do it. Because you want to have a face to the name. And even if you want to use a fake name, I'm going in general, I'm not saying you do, just set up a fake name, but have your own picture there, but that's your persona. You know what I mean? And you use that as your social media.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, I'm thinking let's try get a little bit inspirational and try get a little bit of advice for the South African and African bands.
Sure.
In terms of international touring, do you in your opinion, Facebook likes, Spotify plays, what is it that promoters generally look into when it comes to booking the artists. And I guess, yeah, what are the key things for the bands to actually work on in order to get noticed abroad?
They need to work on their connections. That's the number one thing over anything else, because Spotify plays can be faked, as can Facebook likes, as can Twitter followers, as can Instagram followers, and the whole fucking 9 yards. So if I was in a band in South Africa, I would start connecting with people outside the country and start connecting with people that in other bands that you know, just connect. That's what I would be doing. I would be building relationships with people, not necessarily focusing on those numbers quite as much, even though you do need to. The ultimate stat you want to be focused on, though, is sales, money coming in, right? So if you're trying, like, if you can say I sold 60 CDs on my release day, and you have proof of that, that goes a lot farther than saying I got 100,000 Facebook fans and no sales. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, great.
100%.
So, but one other thing I want to just point out too is, like, you don't want to be like, if you're going to start connecting with people outside of your area, don't just go in there trying to spam them. That's the key thing I want to point out. Like for example, just most people know people outside of their country, and you can ask for introductions. You can start going into Facebook groups where other people from other countries are. You can start commenting on message boards and blogs, the whole 9 yards, right? There's ways of doing it, but just don't go in there spamming people saying, hey man, I want to get on a tour. Or, hey man, can you sign me to your label?
Right. Yeah, I think somebody like Derek of Devil Speak kind of epitomized that, especially on like mediums like Twitter, where he was quite proactive. Obviously, Devil Speak's been on a little bit of a hiatus recently because of lockdown, but I heard they are getting back into it. But good. Yeah, I mean, keeping a presence, I guess, across all social media kind of has to be kind of a key thing. Just keeping your fans connected. Commenting and retweeting in terms of Twitter are important.
Say again. I didn't catch that last bit.
I was going to say, how important is the whole retweeting and commenting on posts that you might be tagged in from, like, media or other blogs?
It is 100% important at all times. So, like, if someone tags you, like, for example, if I tag you in a post, for example, we're going to use you again since you're sitting here, you should always respond, because what's going to happen is a lot of my followers are going to see your response. And they might click on you, they might follow you, they might buy something from you. So you always want to respond to that type of thing. It's better to respond or retweet than like the post, because what happens is that other people will then see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, when I think about somebody that communicates well with her fans, Lindsay Schoolcraft comes to mind immediately. It's somebody that even though I've never spoken to her face to face, we still communicate on Instagram. She'll always like and comment on posts from everybody, and it's quite amazing. You can see how much the fans are actually endeared to her by that almost personal connection that they have from that.
Yeah, and she spends like an hour and a half every single couple days going through every single comment. And if she can't respond, like you said, it's a like. If she can't, or it's just like a retweet or something, everything that she sees, it's responded to. And if someone that's got 60,000 followers can do that, a band with 1,000 followers can do that easily.
Sick. One of my bands that I'm not creatively involved in, but basically I'm like the live bassist for, they hire a local PR guy, and he got us some YouTube reaction video, and needless to say, it didn't go the way that was envisioned. And shortly after that, Lyle actually sent me, I think it was a screenshot of something that you mentioned about, like, press is press, and don't take it personally if someone doesn't like your shit. So in that vein, I was wondering, without naming any bands or anything like that, if you could sort of unpack the most grievous mistake that you've ever seen a band make online. Like the most facepalm moment. It can be one of the bands you represented, or
I got it.
Like,
no, I got it right now. I got it. So the worst thing that ever happened, well, most facepalm moment rather, was a band decided to personally attack the person that said that their album wasn't very good. So it was at a pretty big site. I'm not going to name the site's name, but it's no longer in existence, but it was big at the time. This was like 2015. And they decided to send all their fans to the page to call the writer an idiot. They did the same thing on Facebook. They did the same thing on Twitter. And they basically looked like fucking assholes. And people were talking about what fucking assholes this band was for fucking weeks. And it was so goddamn embarrassing. I couldn't believe it. That is the worst thing I've ever seen anybody do.
How do you manage that? Do you just cut them loose, or like how do you manage that fallout?
Well, I was already paid for the campaign, so there wasn't really a heck of a lot I could do other than say, hey guys, could you maybe not do this? And of course they said, no, fuck you, we're going to do it anyways. So obviously I haven't worked with them ever again, but you just, you just got to, like, if I think I went to the site owner and I think I apologized on their behalf, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, look, I didn't know they were doing this. I literally didn't until later. But yeah, I mean, they just do what you can, right? And you explain, and you just say, like, look, the band's an idiot. And, the site goes, okay, yeah, I understand some bands are idiots. And that's really about all it is. I mean, I could have gotten blacklisted from people for doing that, but it fortunately didn't happen that way.
Sick. Well, I'm glad other people's idiocy didn't influence your reputation.
Only my own idiocy affects my own reputation. For example, okay, so you want to hear a facepalm moment that I did? I'll give you one that I did if you guys want it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, so here's my advice. I'm not going to go into details. On your social media, keep your opinions to yourself. Because I tweeted out an opinion about a band that I legitimately do not like, a fairly well-known band, and I lost, I think it was 40 or 50 followers just as a result of that one fucking tweet. And I know I got blacklisted by a few people because I said that about that band. So there's your Curtis Dewar, do not ever tweet your own opinions about bands, or you could suffer wrath from people.
Is there a gray area though? Because I've seen it a lot with the brutal death and the slam subgenres when it comes, and even in terms of black metal, where you'll have certain black metal bands and artists trolling other bands who are calling themselves black metal, but they're not true black metal, and they'll get called out. Is there a gray area when it comes to confrontation online?
Of course, there always is, but at the same time, you got to be careful, and you got to be realize that it could bite you in the ass. That's all you got to be aware of. Like, if you're okay with being bitten in the ass, it's fine. Like, look at a guy like Chris Barnes. He's doing something. The guy from Trapped, it's the same thing. Trapped might be a bad example, but I think all these people that are doing that, they kind of know that they're going to be not liked by people. So if you're okay with that, then yeah, go ahead. Obviously, I don't want people acting like the guy from Trapped. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I think they kind of know at the same time what they're doing. So if you're okay with people not liking you and blacklisting you, then go for it. But be aware that that's what's going to possibly happen if you do that. And don't cry about it later when people say, I don't want to review you because you were acting like a dickhead.
Right. Yeah, the Glenn Benton syndrome, if you will.
Yeah, he's a good example of that too, right? Like, I mean, you can be mouthy. Some people like it. Some people love Glenn Benton, but other people just fucking hate his guts and won't touch him with a 10-foot pole. So you got to be aware of that. That's the only thing.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess we'd be foolish not to kind of try at least squeeze a little bit of advice out of you in terms of the South African bands. You've represented a couple of African and SA-based metal bands, a couple of campaigns. What do you think the biggest hurdles are in terms of moving forward with the South African or the African extreme metal genre on the global scale?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, there's two things. Is number one, I think a lot of the bands don't think they can do it. And I think it's their own mindset that they can't do it. Like most of the bands that I've heard that you have on your label, at least, and that Monolith have talked to me about, and you know, Chris from Dividing the Element have talked about. Most of them are really good bands that could actually do quite well. But the thing is, they all think that they can't because they're from, you know, Cape Town, or they're from Harare, or wherever the heck it is that they're from, right? It's like a mindset thing first that they have to get over, is that they have to realize they are good enough. A really good example is like Overthrust, because like look at them. They went and toured the UK, all the rest of it, and they're in like buttfuck, you know, Namibia or whatever the hell it is. Botswana.
Gaborone.
Yeah, so like they're in the middle of nowhere, like literally in the middle of nowhere, but they toured the UK. I think they did some European festivals. They've had some massive coverage, and they're literally in a country that's like what, half the GDP of South Africa or something like that. It's tiny, right? It's nothing.
Right.
So if they can do that and get that kind of coverage, like you got to kind of think anybody can. But I mean, the thing is that they also have good music to back it up, right? So it's not, you know, you kind of got to first have the realization that you can do it. And then second of all, being from an African country isn't a hindrance necessarily. Like if I go up to someone and I say, a journalist, and I say, hey, I got this band from Zimbabwe, for example, with Gary, people are more interested in looking at it because they go, fuck, a metal band in Zimbabwe? Like, really? Yeah. Like, then they go, oh, I'm gonna listen to this. And then the next thing they go is some fucking white guy. And they go, what the fuck is this? And then they listen to it some more. And they go, oh, this is pretty good. And then they want to cover it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to say that you're from Africa, right? It can actually act as a benefit if you push it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We've seen guys like Volvadinia go and milk the African gimmick along all of their slogan and all their logo work and design, and it works. It works.
It
you know, it's like, again, like it's not necessarily a pitfall being from Africa. It could actually help like sift through the clutter because of who like where we are.
Well, totally, 100%. And half the time, people in North America think you guys are sitting there in a mud hut in a loincloth, you know what I mean? And they were like, oh, wow, there's actually metal in, you know, Africa? Holy shit, you know, I can't believe these guys have electricity. Oh, wow, they have TV, the whole 9 yards, right? Like, because I'm serious. Most North Americans literally have that image of Africa, right? So it's like when they find out that there's a metal band there, it's like, oh, shit, I really want to check it out. And it acts as something that can really help the band if they use it.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, this has been like such an informative chat. We're going to definitely have to have you back again because you are a well of knowledge that we need to scoop up as much info as we can. But yeah, Alec, what do you say? How did we do this week?
I think it's been awesome and it's been super informative, and I really, really thank you for taking the time to chat to us. It like really means a lot. Do you have any like parting words or parting pearls of wisdom you want to impart into the audience?
Any plugs, any PR, so to speak.
Oh, do I have any PR plugs? Well, okay. So what I would like people to do is, if they haven't ever checked out the Dewar PR Facebook page, check out the Dewar PR Facebook page. Reason why is because I go over a PR tip every single day there. You can also join the music marketing mixer that me and Matt Bacon host. And if you have Spotify, go and listen to the Dumb and Dumbest podcast, which I also host with Matt Bacon, where we also go into more in depth on PR. We do 5 podcasts a week, so there's no reason why you can say that you don't have enough time to listen to it. We got lots of stuff for you to listen to.
And shout out to Matt also. Hopefully we can bring him on the show in the near future also. It'll be interesting to get his perspective on things, especially during this lockdown.
I agree.
But yeah, I think, Alec, we're going to wrap that up for a week. I guess next week we're calling it a break. Next week will be our last, our last lockdown chat for 2020. And Alec and myself are going to do exactly what Curtis told us not to do. And we're going to review our favorite, or at least the top South African extreme metal releases for 2020. So we might lose some followers in the next few weeks also, but it'll be interesting no matter what. So you guys stay tuned for that next week. Again, awesome to have you on, Curtis. We'll chat soon. And Alec, I'll see you next week. And yeah, all of you guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week for another Lockdown Live chat, the last one of 2020.
Cool.